my name is Richard Schechter. I was born at a very early age. And to cut through, Joanne and I remember the first time we ever met Millard Fuller was somewhere in like 1971 in the fall, when our church sponsored and provided a Faith at Work conference. Now, some of you may know what that was, maybe nobody does. Methodist called it, what was that?
Lay witness mission? Yeah.
Lay witness mission, that's right. And so when the other people in the higher echelons were saying, we'll provide leadership for your weekend, I said, fine. And here comes a young guy, tall and skinny, and it was Millard Fuller. He had not been at the Koinonia community more than, I think, what, 2 years or so? I don't remember for sure. But he was a very much an inspirational person to us all. And in the few years following that, we'd hear from him in Zaire saying we sure could use some money, and so on. And some of our people were very much taken by him, so we did keep that contact and that involvement in that way. Then we came over here, and Jim's Bethel UCC had him here, I think, within 4 months or so after we came over here. And he couldn't believe, wondered why in the world we were over here when he'd seen us in Ohio. But that's our first part. So I'll just go around who's next here.
One of my funniest memories is the first blitz, and Naomi was worrying about whether the food was taken care of at the time. And I said, it's either well taken care of or we're in very deep weeds, because she's on a cruise the week before the blitz. I can't remember the name right now, Senior Problems. But the other part that absolutely blew me away is we're having a meeting post-blitz, and the question got asked, well, how much did all the food service cost? She popped off with a number like $46.32. But she had everybody organized to bring meals in and make it all happen. And, but I could remember Naomi fretting about it. And I said, you know, we're either golden or we're in very deep weeds.
Yeah, I remember you went with us to Kansas City, to the International Habitat meeting in Kansas City, and who did we meet there?
Jimmy Carter. He was there.
He was there.
Jim and Pat, and Jim and I almost got invited into their hotel room, except the Secret Service person didn't think that was a good idea.
Well, you do look.
We had been assigned rooms on the floor that they were on, and you weren't supposed to be. They weren't supposed to assign anybody to that floor, and so we were sitting there while they were reassigning us and yet sending somebody up to take our luggage down and everything. And Jimmy and Rosalind came by, and they wanted to know what was going on. We told them. They said, well, would you like to come in our room while you're waiting? I thought this little blonde Secret Service gal was going to have a stroke. She just said, yeah, I know. I regretted that ever since.
I think one of the greatest experiences is what happened at the Blitz of '95. The command post was set up, as I remember, down at Glenwood School.
Yeah.
And I always did hard things like registration, where we had a tent. And
Now wait, honey. The 2000 was at Glenwood, because that was the scattered housing. The 95 was there on the corner of Morton and Canal, or whatever that right there where the subway is.
Okay, let's say it doesn't matter where it was. After the Blitz was over each day, we had a worship opportunity. And so this one day, we were having communion led by Steve Linsenek, Father Steve. And he was taking, we had water and we had bread. We might have had Kool-Aid. I think we had some kind of colored Kool-Aid and bread. But Steve was tearing off the bread and giving us a piece. And here came a kid from the neighborhood. And he had a cookie. And he was kind of a grubby kid. Didn't know what his name was, didn't know really where he came from, but he watched this and he began to tear off pieces of this cookie and follow Steve around and give us. And I thought that's one of the best worship experiences I've ever had in my life. Because he was sharing the little that he had. And that cookie probably meant a lot to him. But he was sharing us because he saw somebody else doing that. And it kind of reminded us why we were down there and why we were doing what we were doing. So that's one of my fondest memories of Habitat.
How I got involved in Habitat was through the Council of Churches. I happened to be on the Social Issues Committee, educational and social issues. And so when Habitat was talked about, we got involved. And then Bobby Hoy had a film that was, it was called Love in the Mortar Joints. And she had a film on that. And she showed that in my living room. And the only one that I can remember that was there was Jim. And were you there, Jim? No, you weren't. I think Jim and I and Bobby and who was the first secretary? McMillan. D. McMillan.
I was there too.
You were there. Yeah, that's right. You were. Yeah. Okay. And so anyway, we showed Love in the Mortar Joints, and then from there on, and then of course I went to Kansas City with you, and we went to Indianapolis and met Rosa Parks, and she was here one time for one of our meetings. And when we had a Habitat build, it must have been on Taylor or something. I'm not really acquainted with downtown or east side. I'm west side. And so anyway, we had a Habitat build, and we had a trailer that we, in the afternoon, during the day, and it was real hot that day, and we baked cookies in the trailer, and the heat was horrible, and we burned a lot of the cookies. But Millard Fuller was at Crossroads Church that evening, and we had cookies, and we had a good crowd. And so those are the few memories that I have. I have a lot more, but I don't want to go into all of them.
Well, this has a little bit to do with the power of persuasion that Jim Perigo has. Many of us know about that. But I had just accepted the call to return to Bethel to join the pastoral staff there. I had been pastor at Zor, UCC, and for a number of years, and Old Bethel before that, but that's another story. But anyway, I had just started in '89, and one evening the phone rang in my home. Now, by that time, Habitat, of course, was up and going, and Evansville and Bethel, of course, deeply committed to that ministry and mission. So it wasn't, the concept wasn't new at all. However, something was happening that I wasn't aware of at the time. But anyway, Jim called and said, we'd like for you to serve on the board. And I thought, well, that sounds like something I ought to do. And he said, now, the current vice president is going to move up to president. So if you don't mind, we'd like for you to be vice president of the board. So I said, well, you know, Jim Farrago, member of the church. So I said, what?
I was an honest guy.
Yeah.
He was holding a brick at the time.
Yeah, right. So I said, sure, okay, I can do that. I'll be the vice president. Well, I did not know that Bill Bauer was going off the board in 6 months. So in 6 months, suddenly I was the president of the board of Habitat, and I had only, as I said, had only been on it 6 months. Well, when I became president, I realized that there was a lot of talk going on about something called a blitz bill, which Evansville had not done before. And you pretty much know the rest of that story. We spent the next couple of years planning and organizing the first blitz bill in Evansville. And I recall those meetings. The other thing I want to say, I was so unbelievably impressed by the people on that board. When I joined my first time on the board, and it was an impressive group of people, deeply committed to the ministry of Habitat and actively involved in their own communities and churches. But anyway, as we sat and planned that, there was a lot of fear and trepidation and many, many prayers offered, hoping and praying that we were not biting off more than we could chew, that we had never done anything like this before. But with the commitment of this wonderful board and a lot of involvement on the part of church members all over the city, and by the grace of God, it happened, and it went very, very well. And I think the location that we were trying to figure out a minute ago, the first blitz bill was in the Morton Canal area. That was the first one. The next one, the headquarters, Jim, was at Culver School. But anyway, that's one memory that I have of the board and my early involvement in it.
How many houses did you build in that first blitz?
Was it 20?
21.
21?
21.
21. Okay. We started, it was going to be 20, and again, it was Jim Farrago that said somebody else in the country had built 20, and he said Evansville could build 21. And so we did.
No, that wasn't Jim Farrago.
It wasn't?
No,
It wasn't.
We had a group, Debbie Vaughn had got a group, that's when we had that breakfast at the
Yeah.
Petroleum Club. Debbie Vaughn set up for me.
Yes.
And he had
That's
all
where
the
that
big
came
shots from Alcoa, Aluminum, and General Electric and places like that. And he said, you've got a presentation, you got 20 minutes at this breakfast. Have 4 guys get up and speak 5 minutes apiece and tell about 4 different things. And then we'll see if we can sell the group on it. So when Butch Fuller and I think Don Bernhardt and who were the other speakers?
Probably you.
No, it wasn't me. I don't speak.
No, wait a minute. He won't be announced as a speaker.
Yeah, that's right.
But then he'll take over the meeting.
That's right. That's
I've had that experience.
right.
Anyhow, he spoke that Atlanta had done 20 houses blitz down there, and then somebody, it was either General Electric or Alcoa Aluminum, said, well, if Atlanta can build 20, Evansville can build 21. I said, wait a minute now. We're going to have a tough time building 20, much less 21. So that's where it came from one. So we got, that day, at that breakfast, we got 5 or 6 houses committed for the blitz, that breakfast that Debbie Vaughn put on for us at the Petroleum Club that day. So.
I would add, from my perspective, I was up there too. I thought Butch Fuller was the most effective and appealing person to sell something I've ever known. I really appreciated what he did there.
Well, I told our board, when Butch Fuller came aboard to Habitat, and who was the gal in Thunder on the Ohio?
Jan
When
Tierbach.
Jan Tierbach, when I said, when those two came aboard, I said, now, we're ready for a Jimmy Carter work camp. So we applied for the Jimmy Carter work camp, and the year before, Jimmy Carter went to Chicago, and they went in debt $200,000, and they told Jimmy, from now on, you'll have to have a committee approve where you're going, because we can't come up with $200,000 to bail you out. So they had a committee that, and we were three of the United States. We were the #1 pick of the three because we were well organized. We had plenty of time to get organized. And Jimmy Carter told him, said, look, I want to go to D.C. next time. And he said, well, he went on and said, Mr. President, this and that, you know, and that we don't want to get in trouble like we did in Chicago. And so he gave the pitch again that, you know, Evansville's really ready for this blitz. But then when Jimmy Carter had a chance to talk, he said, I want to go to D.C., work it out for me. And that was the greatest thing that ever happened to Evansville, because then International didn't put it on, Evansville had to put it on, and it took everybody in Evansville to put it on. Everybody rolled up their sleeves. The Holy Spirit came through the group, and it was an awesome experience. And when we pulled it off, well, we actually pulled it off, and I can't remember, was that year we built extra houses?
We did.
No, that,
Yeah, we built, in addition to that, to the 21, the regular house.
Because I said, look, what's the worst thing can happen to a volunteer when he volunteers to come out and help with that house? That he's told he's not needed. There's enough volunteers, and go home, we don't have anything for you to do. That's the worst thing you can tell a volunteer. I said, let's put in 5 extra foundations. We'll get 5 extra leaders that can head them up. And if we only get the foundations put in, or a few boards laid, what the heck, we're that much ahead. But these people will not be disappointed. And we started that first day, and the people on those 5 other houses got so inspired and got so full of the Spirit, they weren't about to let the other 21 get ahead of them, so they made sure if they had to stay late that night, to catch up with the rest of them. So I'm pretty sure, but my memory's not as good as it never was good, but and I can't remember. I know we finished all of them, but we got 26 that year?
Yes.
And I think that year,
so.
I think that year we had a surplus of 200,000 money left over, plus the 5 extra houses built. And that's what it did when the Spirit of Evansville got to going, and we got things going, and we did it ourselves rather than let International come in and screw it up.
that happened in 1995.
That was 95.
Okay, all right. That's good to have that on record.
I want to go next because I've got a doctor's appointment I've got to leave for. I'm sure none of the rest of you can relate to that, of course. Having a doctor's appointment.
You want to give us an organ recital?
No, it's my lower back. The kickoff event, Bobby and I have been at Habitat for a year. Our job there was to restructure the America's office against the wishes of Millard Fuller, to be honest, who was a very good friend. So we did it, and the board had voted it 3 times, and he had blocked it 3 times. We got it done, and it was time to come back home. And we did, but we both decided to get involved in Habitat. And Bobby, we had a policy, if she was on a board, I would not be on that board and vice versa. But so those of you who remember Bobby know that if she was on the board, Phil was involved in the background all over the place, which was fine. But we set up this tour of housing, and we linked 3 or 4 vans together with CB radios. We did it illegally. You weren't supposed to use that other channel, but we did, so we could talk to each other, and went through those early neighborhoods and ended up at St. Paul's Episcopal Church at their soup kitchen. And that was the kickoff event. One of the beautiful stories from that was Dave Livingston's son, 6-year-old boy, was with us. And when he and his daddy got home, he turned to his dad and he said, "Dad, why do people have to live that way?" that snagged Dave. That got him involved in the project. So it went from there. The first house was built on South Governor, and it was a brick house. We started with brick houses. Those lots, one story, and then I'll stop. Those lots were owned by the city of Evansville. And Bobby and some of you, and I don't know who all went to city council to get those lots donated, and they kept saying no, but the city had had a redevelopment project there, and they'd run out of money. So the lots were just sitting there, and they had all the infrastructure there, sidewalks, you name it, everything was in place. Anyway, the local committee kept persisting, and finally, I think they bought them for $1 a piece. $1 a piece. And that was those were the first Habitat houses in Evansville.
And Reverend Schechter paid for those houses, $12. I remember that. We went
That's
to-
right, yeah.
He
That's
paid
when
for those houses.
we gave him his title,
Yeah.
Rector Schechter.
Right.
I had to get that in there.
Well, one of the things about that block, Little Mary somebody, what was his last, she worked in the hospital, and I think maybe it was, I don't know whether it was at the first or the last of the house being built. She said, you know, that's just where I grew up, right there, in that yard. So it's amazing
Yeah.
that her family grew up there, and now she was getting a new house there. That was good news.
Can't think of her last name.
And I'm trying to think of the
She was
lady.
the first
her
one that
husband.
got her house paid off too.
Yes.
Is that right?
That
Yeah, I
sweet
can't think of
lady
her
with
name.
the
Little
old
bitty
house.
thing, yeah, right,
Yes.
I know you're
Yeah.
talking
She
about.
is a doll.
I
That
can't
was the
think of her.
third house, was the small one on the
Yeah.
east side of the street. The third house that was finished.
That's the one the UCC's
Oh,
built.
man,
Okay.
It's a darling
the
house.
mind is gone.
There was one built on Governor and Cross, and I remember throwing the first shovel of dirt to that house.
Did you hit anything?
Now, I don't know when that was, whether that was after yours or not. Jim, do you know? The house that belonged to the Jones, Mrs. Jones?
Yeah, Bonnie
Bonnie.
Jones.
Bonnie.
That's it, Bonnie Jones.
Bonnie Jones, that's
Yeah.
right. And Miller came to help dedicate.
That, I remember, we didn't have anything across in the beginning. We just had to do it on our own. And we would go to different Habitat meetings and try to find out, well, how do you do this? How do you set up this selection committee? What do you do? And it ended up that so much of the time, I remember they would be asking us, how do you do this? And we'd say, well, this is how we're doing it. So we really didn't have anything written down. We really didn't have any guidelines.
No, I remember when we wrote our guidelines.
We did, that's what we did.
And I think
Yeah.
that it was faith and
Yeah.
working together. We
Right.
all worked together as a team. And the Millers were just, and really, I mean,
Outstanding.
yeah, outstanding.
They did it before
Yes.
I got on and after I
Yes,
got on.
yes, dedicated.
In fact, those selection committee meetings were held at their church
Mhm, right, right.
for a number of years.
I was on it briefly, but they are legends.
I wanted to say about Jim, when we did that first blitz, you remember your Jeep?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He drove around town in a Jeep
Yeah.
that said 20 houses, and then I think you crossed it out and put 21 houses and dust. Painted all over it, it was awesome.
Well, I put on there, hoo yay. No, not hoo yay.
Oh, yeah.
No,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
no,
Oh, yes.
no, it was the singer said when he,
Talking
Okay.
about,
it was his saying, and Pat said, you can't put that on there because that's his, you'll get sued. And I said, he'll never be Evansville, Indiana, so I put it up there, yeah.
we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was, the Jeep flying around town was fun. The meetings were fun. Jim would pull out these little baby Cokes at our meetings. You remember our Cokes you'd have at your office?
Yeah.
That was a highlight of my week. It was fun.
Probably double colons.
I was gonna say, double
No, they were
colors.
real
No,
cold.
they were cold.
Real
They were,
Little cold.
a little-
6.5 ounce cool.
Yeah.
Jim and wife, now do you remember the very first times we were meeting, Jay Van Santen he decided he'd be the head of family selection. Had no idea how to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah, all they had was high school kids.
right.
Now that was something, and we got ourselves in a real jam when they selected somebody.
Worked at Alcoa Aluminum Plant,
Yeah.
made more money than all those put together.
Oh, man, we had about,
And we told them we couldn't accept that committee, and the girls in there, on their committee cried, because they wouldn't accept their person they picked to have the first house.
I think we voted 5 times, you know, we'd read,
Yes.
well, okay, let's vote again on this, and but that showed, we were just in the very beginnings of family selection. We didn't really know how and where and who.
We told him to go to all denominations, get people from different denominations, get different age people, young and old, and get a diverse group, and he comes up with a youth group. So we've had some failures too.
Well, I remember my first time as a big sister. I had a wonderful little sister, and I had met her family once, and they lived in public housing. And I remember the first time we both had to be interviewed and go through the process, and then we became big sister, little sister. And I remember the first time that I had a day with her, an afternoon with her, she told me at the very end, we had a lot of fun, she told me at the very end that her mother had wanted to ask me how she could get into a Habitat house. You know, that her mother thought that they should have better housing. And anyway, she went through a series of moves. I tried to explain to my little sister that, it was a process you had to go through. And in the meantime, over the years of being big sister and little sister, I remember helping the family move into another rental property. But finally, towards the end, after actually she had outgrown the program, Big Sister, Little Sister, I did find that the family did indeed move into a Habitat house, and I was just they were a wonderful family, and I was just so pleased that the mother's dream did come true.
Hey, well, in the parentheses here, somewhere, somebody's holding some pictures, 5 or 7 pictures. And to those who haven't seen them, I want you to know this, the picture of a dark picture, unfortunately, the houses, ramshackle shacks. It turns out a lot better on the screen, and when I had these the slides put onto paper, it turned darker, and that's too bad. But Millard Fuller is in both of them, I think, at any rate. And that was about 2 blocks down from the International Habitat, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And D. McMillan is in one of those. And then there's another picture of D. McMillan. Now, some of you have no idea at all who D. McMillan was. But if you go to a meeting where they hand out the awards for D. McMillan Volunteer of the Year, you'll hear about D. McMillan. She was a member of the Olivet Presbyterian Church where I was, and very much involved with the beginnings of Habitat.
Richard,
Yeah.
I'd like to say that Dee was part of the secretary, and she did a lot of work. Her and I would put out mailings, in the first office.
Yeah, she did all that. Now, I just want everybody to know who's in the picture and why.
Well, Millard's in this one, and this may be the very house that was 2 blocks down from the original office. And they got a new Habitat house. Fred and Marie were their names. and I'd go down and talk to Fred and Marie, and they were standing in the doorway of their new house, and Marie said, "My mama would not believe that I was living in a place like this." And a week later, Marie died. But she got to move into her new house. And Fred continued to live there. And interestingly, this wood was saved. We had a youth group from a college in Kansas or someplace, and they came down and they raised this house, and they chopped up the wood because Fred, the new house, had a wood-burning fireplace.
Stove.
So they burned up the new house, the old house. I hope they didn't burn up the new one. They burned up the old house, and there's poetic justice there, or something, because you would not keep your dog in here if you liked your dog. No plumbing, no nothing. You could see nature every place you looked, because there were holes in the walls.
And there was no outhouse out back.
No
No, they had to
outhouse,
go to a neighbor.
or go out into the kudzu. That's your choice. Never did like kudzu too well.
Well, there's another picture of D.B. Billin sitting under a tree holding a little child. That picture was taken at Immokalee when we were out there inspecting the place on a tour from Fort Myers, where the international meeting was being held. So I just wanted you to know who you're looking
That's the
at.
one he's telling.
I'm glad you told that, because I knew that the old house was being torn apart, and literally I do have a picture of that new one. We were inspecting it, but I didn't take the green. And to know that they were able to live warmly in the wintertime because of the old house.
Was that the first Habitat house in Americus?
No.
There's been others.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to ask Jim and Jeanette, did you ever dream, like back then in those days when you worked for Millard, did you ever dream all this would happen? What were your thoughts back then?
Well, Jeanette can tell you more about that, because Millard would come in and tell you to send so much money to someplace.
I was the receptionist, but I was also the bookkeeper. Linda, when I got there, she said, "Would you mind taking over the books?" I said, "Show me what you're doing," and she did. And interestingly, now when we got there in July of '78, they had only been keeping Habitat books since January. Everything had been going through Koinonia before that. So when I got there in July and told her I would do the book, she handed me 6 envelopes from the bank. She hadn't reconciled any of them. Luckily, she did a very good job of keeping books, so it wasn't any trouble to get it all reconciled. But so I was the one that recorded the money and paid out the bills. And Millard would come in and say, "I want you to send $10,000 to Tondo." I'd say, "Millard, if I send $10,000 to Tondo, we won't be able to pay our bills here." He said, "Send $10,000 to Tondo." So I would. And within the next week, we'd have enough money to pay the bills. We never did not have enough money to pay the bills, even though a lot of times I sent money over with a prayer that things would come in. But I forgot what the original, I did have a comment on the original question. Oh, did we think it was ever going to get that big? I don't think. I mean, way down deep, I couldn't imagine it, but Millard would not let you think that. If you were around him, you had to think big. And so it was just, we knew it was going to grow. We were just glad we were there when we were there, when it was small, because it was really a lot of fun to be there. I would call I would answer the phone, and I never knew where the call was coming from. It very seldom came from Americus, because nobody liked us in Americus. But it could be from anywhere, in the United States or overseas. And most of the time, I knew who it was, so it was because it would be board members or something, and I knew who they were. So it was really neat. And my favorite call of all that I got was this elderly man in Iowa. He said one of the college towns, I can't think which one it was right now. And he said, if you ever need something really badly, you let me know, and I will send you a check to cover it. So I told him, because at that time, all I had to type on was an electric typewriter. And I was typing every thank you note all the way through, and with the correct tape, you know, and all this stuff. And the IBM Selectric with the backspace that would correct and come out. And I said, if I could have one of those, I would be in seventh heaven. And he said, you get it and tell me how much I need to write the check for. And so the best thing I ever got in Americus was a blue IBM Selectric typewriter.
That is hilarious, Jim.
Where I didn't have to use this kind of stuff to make the corrections. Because when you're typing every single letter, it's a lot of typing.
Yeah, I want to go back, like what you talked about. Jim, you remember after we'd struggled and struggled to get one house built, and the board was somewhere along there. Now, you know, my memory is not at all good, but the fact is, we were talking, what kind of a goal should we set for the next year, or maybe 2 years, whatever it was. And so I said, well, maybe 2 years, two houses. And Jim Perigo said, why don't you think big? Let's plan for 5 or 6. What was it you said? And we all thought, he's crazy.
We all agreed with that.
Remember? We just couldn't imagine.
No.
But setting the goal up, and he was the one that kept setting the goal ahead of us. Let's think big.
That's what I meant earlier when I said, when I joined the board, how impressed I was with the people on that board and the commitment they all had.
It was a working board.
It was, and it was people like Jim and lots of others, many of whom are seated right here. But that spirit you were talking about that Millard had, where you said a minute ago, Jeanette, he would not let you believe that it couldn't be done. And I believe with all my heart, that same spirit was in these early board members. They believed it could be done, and would not accept anything else. And I was so impressed by that. And
well, it could never have been done, either one of those, well, actually any of the blitzes could never have been done if it hadn't been a working board.
Yes,
with,
that's right.
with the staff
That's right,
we had.
yeah.
There was just no way that it could.
But you mentioned Butch Fuller a while ago, and there were so many others like him that not only did the hard work, the publicity and the paperwork, but was out selling the story to other people, convincing others to come on board, and then they themselves got out there with the hammer and did the work.
But see, we had an in with God.
We did.
Yeah, we had FP, and when FP, when FP would pray to God, well, God listened.
Yes, that's right.
Well,
That's
now,
because he prayed so long.
Yeah.
I didn't pray as long as that fella told me, I believe he preaches. He preaches 3 hours.
Oh my.
Oh,
I think we ought to recall, I'm going to recall, and you can listen. We've become aware of the fact on the board that here our work, the dream of Habitat would take place largely in an area that many black people live. But we didn't have anybody like that on our board at all. And somehow or other, I don't know how, we became aware that there was a monthly meeting of a fellowship of black pastors. What was the name of it? Sunset something or other, right?
I don't think so.
Ministers Alliance.
Ministers Deacons Alliance.
Well,
Yeah.
so Dee McMillan and Joanne and I finagled an invitation. I don't know how we did it, but it was at your church. See, we went down there, and he was in charge of it. I suppose wherever the group met, that pastor was probably in charge. And they allowed us to talk for 15 minutes or so about habitat. Well, out of that, the only one of those, I'll say, he's the only one who really picked up on the dream and said, yeah, I'm gonna help. And I've always respected you for that fact, that you, well, probably your wife talked you into it, so but nonetheless,
Everybody's got a
that's
pearl.
where it started with getting habitat, the black community involved, and he probably stood for a lot of criticism and so on, suspicion because of others, but nonetheless, he's there, and he was with us. And how many times did we go visiting on the family selection committee? My gosh, that's another whole chapter.
And I also can't tell you how many times after some really long and struggling board meetings, we would turn to FP as we were ending the meeting, sincerely, and say, FP, please close this with prayer, because we were in the need of prayer. And he would absolutely just come up with the most beautiful and inspirational and challenging prayer. He was our prayer.
Hey, listen, we've got to go around. We haven't had given you any chance to say a word.
You don't want to hear what I gotta say. No, it was an honor to serve, but I think we have to remember that if it wasn't for poor people, we wouldn't have needed Habitat. The banks wouldn't touch poor people and give them loans for homes. I see Habitat for Humanity just what it is, for humanity. And they really, I was just a little person out there on the board. You know, not that you all were better or anything, but because y'all had the most experience, and then Reverend Miller and Sister Miller, you know, I sort of looked up to them because they'd been there way before me. But I was just proud for someone to live in decent housing and would not have to pay all this interest per month. The house payments were low, and we were there for them. You know, it wasn't like we put them in a house and went off till the next one. Everybody started. It was like a big family. It really was like a family. And I never did feel inferior or felt like you all were smarter, because you weren't.
Not Marlene.
But I enjoyed, that's one board and the community action. Those two boards are the ones that, and I've served on a lot of boards in this city, but those two boards were the most meaningful to me because we have the least of them. What some people would consider the least of them.
I would like to say something about Jim Perigo. Jim made a multitude of ways, money-wise, material-wise, himself. He gave of himself, his family, packed. And all the things you did to begin with, and you stuck with it you're still with it. And that really means a lot. And I think that's why Habitat has really blossomed and growing in Evansville.
Well, and we finally moved across the street from him too, just in case he thought that he could escape.
That's right.
We just
That's right.
moved the office over there, so.
Well, the other thing I'd like to say is, as a teacher, I've seen kids that got Habitat Houses' lives totally improved. I had some of the kids either in my classes or I knew them in my school. And it makes a huge difference for the kids, probably more than the parents. It changes their home life completely.
you know, we don't have 100% successes. Nobody does. If they tell you they do, they don't. But it sure helped a lot of kids.
Yeah, that's right. And somebody mentioned over here about the fact that there's no interest to be charged for the loan and so on. To this very day, over where we live, and I have not gotten involved in the Habitat program there. It's now called, as of about 6 weeks ago, the Greater Cincinnati Habitat for Humanity. There are 3 states that are kind of border there: Kentucky, Illinois, and Indiana.
I gotta go. I got some stuff I gotta do. I'll
Bye,
see you.
Marlene.
Keep in touch, yeah. Please, please. Okay.
But it's amazing, even after all these years, I still hear people say, well, don't they have to pay interest? You know, they don't believe that Habitat has that principle of low payment, no interest, and that they have to work. Over and over, people say, what? You mean they have to help build their houses? The idea is very slow to catch on to the average American mind. I would love to have FP and Pearlie and the rest who have spent, and anybody here who spent a lot of time doing the in-home visits, in-home interviews. I remember one, I'm pretty sure both of you you took me, really. I was, whoever was ahead, I was about a block down or 2 blocks below where, below where Washington, what's the name of that inner city ministry that started?
Patchwork?
Patchwork. We were just down below a couple blocks, and big old 2-story house, high ceilings, cold in the winter time, and we get in there, and Pearlie, you were the head, I'm pretty sure. We could, as you say, we could see daylight around the doors and through the windows. And then as she was asking questions, we noticed a rat moseying along the floorboard there and disappeared into the room. And we knew there were cockroaches everywhere. That's the kind of thing probably you don't see too much these days, but think of all the times we'd have that kind of condition to visit.
Oh yeah, sometimes you could really sit here and study astronomy through the roof and botany through the floor. Some of those places.
And one of those houses is about a block across from your church to the, what direction is that? Across the block from your front door.
West.
A lady was running, and she had extension, now this is winter time, she had extension cords around, and there weren't enough chairs to sit, so half of us stood up in the kitchen. And she was concerned about the fact that we saw that the extension cord was coming up out of the basement door. And here she had 6 inches of water in the basement. And that's where the fuse box was. Who would want to go down there to check it out, you know? It was incredible how people would live.
And pay a lot to live that way.
Yes.
They didn't live there cheap.
Yeah, that was it. Most of them, their
That
house
was a
payment
shock.
was less than their rent.
Yeah.
I think another thing that I'm so thankful for is that this same spirit is alive and well today. The current board members and the current staff at Habitat continue that ministry so beautifully. It has not stopped, and we should be thankful for those who continue to serve on the Habitat staff, on the board, some of whom are folks that were there when we were there, but others have come, joined the board, and they continue to do this wonderful, wonderful work. And I'm personally thankful to God that for all the contributions that the new members and the new staff people have made to Habitat.
Hey, Jim,
There's another fellow that has not been named at all, who was right there early on, not from the first, but shortly after. Francis somebody from
Hillenbrand,
Hillenbrand.
Francis Hillenbrand, yeah.
Is he still living?
He is. He's at the Little Sisters of the Poor.
Oh.
And I often think about Francie. He has a daughter who's in our community, and she was a class ahead of me, so he's always been on my mind, and I never was sure. I mean, I knew he was active in the Evansville Council of Churches, and I knew that was the birth of Habitat for Humanity, you know, but he's doing pretty well, you know.
I think we met at his home one time,
Really.
years ago. It was
West
so many years
Farmers,
ago. I remember that, yeah.
Wasn't there another Mennonite that served kind of like the executive director, Jim, for
Yeah.
way back?
Jay Hartford.
Yeah, I think he's on the list that I have in
Yeah,
there.
we still hear from them at Christmas. We exchange
Do you?
cards and, yeah.
Isn't he on the list?
You mean that list that you did,
Yeah.
Jeanette? Oh, yeah,
He's
he's
on
there,
there.
he's there.
They moved into the Habitat neighborhood.
They
They
were
came
at
in,
house
they moved
number
into one of
6
our
and number
houses.
7, I can't remember.
Yeah.
We got 2 boys and they're both pretty well grown now too.
We installed the Habitat phone
We just kinda-
into that house because Jay was gonna be living there. We didn't really have an office. So it was put in Jay's house, and they need someone to sit there and wait for the telephone guy to come out and install it. So I've always remembered the phone number, and it's never changed from that original phone number. 423-5623.
423-5623.
That's miraculous when you stop and think about it.
All the way in Jay Hartford.
We can never change it. We'll have to change the area code though, pretty
We had people donate furniture, so we had the house set up in furniture, and we knew they were bringing their 2 little boys. And we rounded up teddy bears and stuffed animals and stuck them all around the house. And when they came in, the boys were just delighted. Felt like it was home.
One of the things I noticed about families who went into Habitat houses many times, their level of appreciation went up. You could see the difference in the way they carried themselves and all. They had a sense of pride, more or less.
Yes.
Those who moved into the Habitat, and some of them moved from just terrible places.
Yeah.
And moving into a brand new home, you could see the difference in the children. I noticed that.
Yes.
Jenny Wolkner, who's I don't know what her title is now. She does the books, but she does a lot of other stuff too. But she sent me an email telling me that one of the partner families had called the office and had asked for me, and Jenny told her that I had retired, and she hadn't gotten the message. We sent a mailing for my retirement party to all the partner families, but somehow she didn't see it, so she wasn't there, because she said she surely would have been if she'd known about it. And she told Jenny that she really would like to talk to me, so Jenny sent me her phone number. And I called her, and she said, she just told me how much she always appreciated that I was there because she knew she could talk to me. And I think that was the thing that meant so much back in the early days, that they could come in and they felt like they could have somebody that would listen to them. But that made me feel good that she wanted to talk to me after she heard I retired.
Well, I hope that whoever does write this up will include just a modest little note of appreciation from the board, who would meet over at Jim Perigo's office, and he always offers a bottle of pop. Small bottle, but it was a bottle.
Hey, that's all they made in those days. That was a long time ago.
this was better today than it was years ago. We used to bring our lunch into your office, remember?
Yeah.
And have picnics in your office.
Oh,
Yeah, we brown
We
bacon.
did.
That's right, we do. Well,
And you all remember Bill Bauer?
Yes.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes indeed.
I thought that Bill and you actually served as joint presidents for a while. Did you or not?
No, we were sort of, he moved up to president when I became vice president, but then he,
I've been telling that story wrong. now.
well, it's all right, either way, it's fine.
Oh, you need to go.
You know, the first memory I have of Bill Bauer, when our group was starting up to visit, we'd meet down at the Grace Lutheran Church on whatever street that is, and meet in the manse, which was their community room or whatever. And here came a Corvette, Chevy, up to the curb. And I thought, man, oh man, who in the world is this? Out pops you and Bill Bauer.
Bill took me to the meetings every time. Right, you're right. Well, I'm sorry, I got a mother-daughter meeting at 2 o'clock. I gotta go. It's been nice to see all of you, all of you. It's been wonderful. I was hoping for this for a long time. This was great to have us all together.